Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank you, everyone, and Dr. Ellisha for joining us in this IIUM webinar on the topic of Malaysian higher education's encounter with futures landscape in retrospection. This particular webinar will be focusing on a series of questions that I have in mind for you, because we are convinced that you've been in the thick of things and you have much to share. I really feel privileged that I've been given this chance to sit with you and have this conversation with you. But before that, let me please introduce who you are to all our listeners. Dr. Ellisha Nasruddin began her scholarly journey with the Futures Episteme as the project editor of University Science Malaysia's 2007 Futures Book Project, constructing future higher education scenarios, as well as the contributor to 2007 USM's research book, 50 Years of Development in Higher Education in Malaysia. Following these two publications, in 2011, she published the article Transformative Foresight, USM Leads the Way, in the special issues on futures education in a publication called The Futures. So we've mentioned futures a few times in this introduction. In consulting, she's got several projects underneath her belt also, and it includes 2007 when she was involved in facilitating the Malaysian Examinations Council's initiative with scenario planning on the future of examination and school individual-based assessment. That was a huge contribution, I'm sure, speaking as a parent with children who are going to school. And besides that, they actually her biodata is amazing. It's very impressive, and I'm going to have to perhaps summarize some parts of it. She was also a project manager of United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability, as well as she played a contributing role in the university's research grant as principal investigator 2013 to 2017 on foresight on corporate social responsibility and corporate power in the tourism sector, a case study of Penang as a sustainable heritage site. Penang is a beautiful state of Malaysia. If anyone has not been to you, well, you should. Recently in 2018, she co-authored a chapter on a review of University Science Malaysia's experience with foresight, titled Transformative Foresight, USM Leads the Way, in the book project Transformation 2050. She champions the integration of futures episteme and postgraduate curriculum within the general MBA program, and more so in the specialization of the MBA program in sustainable development, as well as in consultancy projects on organizational transformation under the Executive Development Program and Doctorate in Business Administration program at the Graduate School of Business. All right, I'll stop right there. Dr. Ellisha, some of our listeners, I'm convinced they're not familiar with future studies. I mean, they know what future means and they know what studies means, but they don't know what future studies means, and neither do they understand what futures literacy is all about. So before I ask you pointed questions about Malaysian higher education's encounter with this area of inquiry, could you please give me a short introduction and about what futures is all about? Or why is it important?
Right. Thank you very much, Puan Zarina, and I'm actually most appreciative of the opportunity to be here under a very auspicious program led by IIUM. And actually, it's most heartening to know that this is an area which is from my perspective, it keeps coming back and forth to my, in my learning and teaching experiences at where I am at University of Science Malaysia. And if I were to explain in the most, if I could explain the most in layman's viewpoint what futures studies are about. It's actually it's very it is. I mean, from academic angle, they talk about the futures episteme or futures methodology, but unless you are a researcher, you do not really use it the way we are expected to use. But from the point of view of a normal person's interest in futures, right? We normally would call it foresight as an angle that is much more fascinating, because I see the general public, anyone, any stakeholders involved who's interested in understanding the future, dabble with the word foresight quite a bit. The corporate environment likes to dabble with the word foresight.
Exactly.
Even in higher education, we use the word foresight. Anywhere, even with the government, we use the word foresight. Foresight in higher education, foresight in the technology sector, foresight in IR 4.0, foresight industrial revolution, foresight in foresight in IR 4.0.
Also outlook, right? Economic outlook.
Economic outlook, for if you will, right? And most of the time, we use the word trends analysis.
Yes.
10 trends to look forward to, 20 trends to look forward to, and people love that. And normally if you think about, if anyone's interested in the area of foresight studies, it's actually a fascinating area where just about anyone can dabble with it. Anyone can learn, as long as you use certain tools that can help you understand the future. And of course, you would for some of us who are not who are new to it, all you need to know is to understand that if you want to understand what foresight is about, you need to work. You need to understand what the current situation is. What are we going through as an individual, as part of society? What is our current situation? What are the issues we face today? What were the issues that led to what we're facing today? And if you were to study the current events, what do you see is an important issue that might crop up in the future if you don't figure it out? But it has to be done collectively. Because we live in a society, and the smallest unit we are is part of a family. So our family can dabble into foresight by looking at the issues that we face today as a family, and then you look at all the different dimensions of the issues, from societal point of view that has impact on you, from technological point of view, from educational point of view, from economic point of view, from political point of view. And I normally like to add another dimension we call the aesthetics dimension, because life is about looking at things from a beautiful context. Everything has spatial context, visual context to it. So everyone is affected by all these different dimensions. And if we look at all these dimensions, it allows us to think about the issues much better. It's a framework. And then you think about how, if you want to move forward, how would you tackle these issues? And as you move forward, you'll be thinking about what is two important uncertainties in the future that you might want to consider, and you can come up with a quadrant mapping of it, and based on that you think of the possible scenario of the future that you might face, and finally you ask yourselves, now, do I like this scenario? Do I not like these scenarios? And you can end it with what we call the preferred future that you are interested. So you ask yourselves, if this is what we might face in the future, what could we do to be ready for that potential future, so that we take new project initiatives as a family or as part of a community to create new outcomes that we desire. So that if the future were to come one day, and that is not too rosy, you are not in a state where you're not ready for it.
Exactly. I was just going to throw in a quick question, because, before you start delving into something more serious, I mean, when I start throwing the more specific questions to you, and this is just for the benefit of laymen or
Yes.
bystanders, observers, who
Right.
have no inkling of futures really, and they're
Right.
listening to us right now. And I like the fact when you said that it's about doing it. The best is to do it collectively as a group, and the only
Yes.
unit that we know
Yeah.
right now is our family, which is wonderful because we can actually introduce this to our children, to our husband, to our extended
That's
family,
right.
even to sort of
That's
speak
right.
about what's ahead. And then you mentioned tools.
Yes.
Can I ask, like, very, very simply, besides the quadrant, but generally, what sort of tools are you referring to?
Oh, normally, we can use what we call the STIPA analysis, which is what I just mentioned. Which the STIPA analysis refers to. You look at anything, can you analyze it from the context of societal, technological, environment, educational, political, and I add another one just now, aesthetics context. So anyone can sit down and look at issues from that context. In fact, in a lot of programs now, courses, studies, they use STIPA a lot in their analysis, not realizing that can be used to go one step beyond and understand how that could be used from a foresight study perspective. So that is one simple tool you can use. The other simple tool you can use is I like this one. It's called the futures wheel. It's a futures wheel. It's like a spoke on a wheel. You put an issue in the center, and then you allow your mind to go deeper and say, if suppose you take an issue, impact of COVID-19 on health of family, right? So that
Right.
is a constant issue for everyone. Now, if that is an issue that we need to consider, right? Now, what is the consequence of COVID-19 on the family? Now we're talking about family, right?
Yes.
So then you ask yourself, what is the consequence of it? So you have the first order impact that you want to look at. So as many first order impacts you can look at it from by looking at using the STIPA context, and that will be the first order impact. Now then you can go another layer forward by looking at the second order impact or the first order impact. For example, let's take one first order impact. The impact of COVID-19 on the health of family is, for example, I'm picking a specific context, health, right? The impact of COVID-19 on family, first order impact could be that the elderly living in the family will need to be supported in a different way, right? So if that is a first order impact referring to the elderly, the second order impact could be if you are supporting the elderly with a different structural environment where will be supported differently, the second order impact could be as a consequence of that, all right, how does that affect visitation from family members? Perhaps that means there is separation. That's a second order impact. The third order impact could be something else.
Are you
From
describing the futures wheel or?
a futures wheel. So a futures wheel can have many first, second, third order impacts. And you'll find it will be a flowery diagram of the impacts of the first impact that leads to the second, third impacts. And when you reach the third impact, you'll find that there's something that you may not have thought before, something surprising on the third order impacts that tell you, hey, I never thought because of COVID-19, there'll be, for example, crimes, or there'll be, for example, some other impacts that is more distant in the future that you did not think about before. So that is a lively process that you go through, but it will be done collectively. Whoever's involved, you'll be doing it collectively, and it has deep meaning, personalized meaning. So when you do foresight study, it's very personalized, and a group of people coming together may have different outcome as opposed to another group that comes together.
Right.
But it is something personalized, and you own it. And that is an example of another tool that you can use when you use foresight. In fact, I think as time goes by, the context of foresight studies, there's so many other different tools. People tend to append to it. It becomes much more creative. The whole process is supposed to be a creative process of understanding the future, and then you let your mind use your creative head to understand, hey, what have we not considered about the future that we should be considering? And when you thought about it, then you start thinking, hey, let's sit down and let the dust settles, and then ask yourself, okay, what does it mean for us today? You want to move forward? Should we leave it as is? Should we consider some context of some planning and how we want to approach our life better or not? So
that's wonderful. What you just sorry to interrupt, but I think because it's great that you actually we were starting off the session with something more personal, something more private, something that every listener could take into their heart and away to their home, and someone you could do it as a couple with your husband, reassessing decisions, what we're going to do, schooling for the kids, maybe even reallocating of funds. Exactly. And I wish there was an opportunity for us to have illustrations, but at the moment we'll think of something and create another platform for that, Dr. Ellisha, for you, for us to maybe have a workshop, or maybe you could illustrate certain things while doing it, but maybe not in this this interview, because it was sort of organized in the sort of last minute.
So, that's right. Yeah.
Shall I just jump? I'm gonna. Yes.
Please go ahead.
Go ahead. Finish off. No worries.
I've done a number of exercises with my students, my MBA students, and they've come up with wonderful futures wheel, which is personalized within the group amongst themselves. And there are a lot of visuals or frameworks that maybe if one day there is an opportunity that I might be able to share the works of the students. And they enjoy the process because it allows them to think outside the paradigm of being technical, because most students, we are very schematic in how we think. Everything must be bulletized. Everything has to be based on quick short answer that is seen in the textbook. But this one, you go beyond the textbook, but you have to still based on what's going on today. It still have its factual driven evidence connected. Although
very worthwhile.
Yes, but you still have to see the foresight allows you to see the vision of the future that you never thought you want to go into or you want to think about. So that helps, especially for students who are, I understand there are a lot of students who are trying to think about what they want to do after they finish Form 5. And they don't know what to do, where to go, which courses to take, or which degree to take on. So if they were to sit down and use this exercise, it might just help them to think about how to move forward. Actually, it can be fascinating when you start using it.
Thank you. At a personal level, I'm sure it sounds very inspiring. It sounds that everyone needs to do it, actually. I see that at a personal level too. Okay, can I just now steer us towards the topic of the day, which is to study how Malaysia's universities area of higher education encountered with futures literacy. What was the experience like for Malaysia generally? You can quote USM as the case study, obviously, and I'd just like to know what sort of impact it had in terms of making education in Malaysia somewhat different, and is our experience, and how we want to educate our students. Please, Dr. Ellisha.
Yeah. All right, thank you. I mean, thank you for the opportunity. What I'm sharing is more of allows me to go and understand deeper about the experience I've had with foresight for the last, actually, if I think out loud, around 17 years. I mean, if I were to take from 2007 till 2020, that's around 13 years plus minus. So it is, every time I think about foresight, it gives me a different perspective of what I'm learning about foresight, because the only way for me to understand foresight is to experience it and work with the students or through my research. And I think if there's the biggest impact that foresight has, or future studies has had on Malaysia's higher education, it opens the pathway for the higher education to consider a roadmap in planning the future in ways that they never thought that they want to consider, because we either do it top down, right, coming from the ministry, what should be done, or we could also decide in accordance with ministry's mandates, what universities should look like in the future. So among the main points that I think the biggest impact that future studies has had on education has had in the higher education is where in terms of developing unconventional KPIs, key performance indicators. Now, key performance indicators is a big it's almost a taboo in the university environment, because that's the only thing we are being told to comply with every day, in everywhere, in every way. And that really takes away the soul in our heart, because we are here to be part and parcel of sharing knowledge, sharing quote-unquote wisdom. But if you think of KPIs, it is very much contextualized to the overall context of what university is about. You publish or perish, right?
Exactly.
So this whole context has actually, in many ways, through the years, affected how we see ourselves, what we're about. But when you do foresight, it allows you to put on the green hat, that you start thinking outside of the borders of what expected of you. You start questioning certain assumptions of what and how something should be done or could be done. And you're willing to be bold about what's possible in higher education, and you steer away from the well-known version of education, what we call McDonaldization of education. What that means is that, just like what's going on in the private industry, they are being forced to create their own income generation. And when they are being forced to do that, they have no other choice but to get as many customers, which are the students, as part of their market. And what does that mean? You come up with structured content, structured curriculum. And yet we have this conflict where with this structured curriculum, you're also supposed to be able to humanize the students, to able to bring out the best in them, where you have not just someone with technical ability or competency, but also someone who's able to lead, who's able to champion change, who's able to do many things that an organization expects them to do.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Hang on, because I wanted to just ask a question which is suitable at this point. Forgive me. I know when you said it also beautifully about how KPI stifles the professors, the academicians. It takes away the soul and the spirit. It tells you to publish in a very top down. It compels you to do things that would not come to you naturally, because you're supposed to be building a complete whole person at the university, or that's what an educational institution is supposed to do, right? To impart knowledge, to groom, to nurture. But at the same time, the realities is that the corporate sector and the world out there, when the students leave the universities, Dr. Ellisha, they would need to be able to survive and generate income for themselves and the family, right? So when you've got industries, key people in, for example, the finance industry saying to universities, you are not producing graduates who can hit the ground running. You're not producing graduates who can think outside the box. They're not champions. They're not leaders. We have to send them for extra training, other types of certificates to make them be able to work, for instance, in a bank properly. I've heard it myself. I've sat in a forum with very senior people from the banking sector, and they say that there is something wrong with the university's curriculum on banking, for example. This is like a few years ago. So then how do you there's a fine balance, right? How do you strike that balance? They need to be employable because you need to be practical. We're not, at the same time, are we trying to produce another Ibn Khaldun or a Steve Jobs, or do we want? How does the university know where to strike the balance and how to humanize the education at the same time, giving them values, making them be community driven, sustainable, and all that? How do you do all of that?
Right. Yeah, interesting. I'm going to bring it from the foresight or future studies perspective, because it's where I'm talking about it from the context of where our interview is about. Now, when you think about this, actually, the whole idea of how education has been taught in the classroom is always textbook based, right? When we have the
Yes.
textbook version, it works when you have 400 students in a class, 600 students in a class, or you have 5 classes to go through every week, and it's the same class that's repeated over the whole week, and because you have many students that you have to work with, so you want to repeat the course you're teaching. Now, those days are gone because, like it or not, the corporate are actually open to the idea of creative and able graduates who can bring in new ideas to the organization, right? And they value that more and more now, of course, within a certain boundaries that they still work with. Now when we bring in the context of foresight studies, actually foresight studies allow us to actually allow students to not be too rigid with how they approach learning. It actually allows us to allow students to have what we call the learner-centered approach in learning. When you use a learner-centered approach in learning, you actually brings in meaning to what you learn. So you may attend a course, say on marketing, on a any related to political science. They're very content-based, very substantive. You either know or do not know the subject matter. Fine, but when you personalize the meaning of what you learn, it's learner-based or students learner-centered. Each one of the individual in the classroom, when they leave, they actually have a different meaning attached to the course. And when they do so, and if you apply the foresight context in it, certain tools in it, it allows students to actually bring out their frame of reference that is very much them in there. So it's not about the answer to this question is this answer only or that answer only. There's no absolute answer, but it allows them to think and be able to be analyzed at the highest level of any situation, any current issue that's prevailing out there. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the corporate, where the corporate comes in and say, hey, we want someone who's able to hit the ground when they start to work. Exactly. More and more in my interaction with the corporates who are when they are being initiated with the foresight tools, actually they are very open to the context of creativity that is lacking even in a corporate environment, because they are being schooled to see things in a certain way. So they actually are open to new contexts of learning. So if that's the case, we ourselves, are we trapping ourselves thinking that there is only one way of teaching or learning, when the corporate themselves are also open to such new ways of learning and teaching? They're actually looking out to the university to tell them, hey, what's going on that we do not know? Of course, in the technical realm, they may know more than us. So when we talk about students not ready and corporate questioning the ability of the students, actually now I think it has to start with the university, the higher education. We need to be open to the context that we have to start the whole process again. We have to unlearn what we learned about how to teach and learn. And then they will be open to how we are doing it. Rather than them complaining, they actually would want to participate in how we do it, so that there is some partnership or collaboration on I do not want to say the idea of outcome of students coming out from the university, because that's not right, because we are all humans and each one of us have our own soul in it, how we develop. So each one of us is different. A student that graduates from a degree in management, they all are not the same. They have seen things differently every day. They are being sensitized about a lot of things in the environment. Nobody will be the same, even if the scroll is the same. And each and every one of the corporates out there, actually, or even institution or the government, is actually questioning what is the human capital is all about today. So foresight has a role to play in helping to trigger new ways of thinking that we have stopped ourselves from thinking. Even, in fact, I think in many ways, academics are afraid to think out of the box because it's easier to think, to teach within the box. When you start teaching out of the box, you have to be ready for a different way of assessing students because each individual will be individual based assessment rather than pulling them under your answer is based on 1, 2, 3, 4. If you get this, you get 10 marks. If you don't, you get 4 marks. If you don't, get 2 marks. I mean, everyone will have different answers to all the questions, and that's difficult to assess. So I don't know. I'm going to point the finger back to me, even if when we think about how we are helping to nurture the bright talents out there. If there's anything, is the learning is coming from us because they are all very bright. It's just that you got to bring out the best in them. The best in them is coming from our ability to facilitate. So our role is more of facilitator more than anything else. Actually, foresight allows you to take the role of facilitator more than anything else. And it can be a difficult role to play because we always want you follow my orders or you don't. That is either in the academic world, is even more so in many respects in a corporate environment. And so if it is helping you to answer this, the whole idea is to be able to unleash that learner-centered approach and being flexible with how the pedagogy approach of teaching and learning. And then you definitely will bring out different contexts of competency that you want to see students, either it's leadership, either it's ability to think analytically, either it's ability to communicate, either it's the ability to be able to see things from a creative point of view. And there's just so many tools you can append to foresight and use it as part of learning.
Yeah,
part of
I was gonna again sort of I think what you said is so insightful, and it really opens up, you know, I mean, areas that I've never looked at, I've never thought about. But as I was listening to you, I just remembered that there was a report that just came up. I can't remember exactly the name of the report, but I do know that it was a different sort of a platform. We were looking at foresight framework and the futures framework, and because of what has happened to date with the coronavirus and the pandemic, and it's ongoing. So the the impact is happening as we speak. There was a publication, and I think they use a foresight framework to say which careers, which professions may not even exist in about 10 years or 20 years.
That's right.
If we were to look at that, and then don't we, I mean, and again, there are different type of institutions, the different type of universities with different types of objectives, you know, and some universities would be, or some institutions are just very specific to the insurance sector, or to the banking sector, or to the arts, where they're doing design, for example, specific to advertisements, and they always work very carefully with the industry, because they want to know where is the industry today, where is it going, because that. If you're a school of design, you need to keep yourself always, abreast of the latest developments in the industry, in the corporate sector. So in a way, you sort of work backwards. You work backwards as you plan for which profession out there is going to be there, not be there. I mean, it's not exactly anyone's guess. There's no magic crystal ball, but you can try and make informed projections. And then after that, you need to sort of go back to the drawing board again, and then you need to look at your programs and custom make it so that the students are equipped to tackle the community, the society, to be gainfully employed, whether they are the bosses or whether they're an employee, or whether they want to start up their own thing. They need to be equipped. And there is the real world. And so I suppose all of that is in our minds, right? And so we go about teaching and facilitating, as you say, facilitating our students, our talent. It is about talent. It is about developing talent for a world out there, whether you want to call it corporate or non-corporate or civil society or what have you. And so foresight will help us with all of that, you're saying? Am I right?
Yes,
You're saying that foresight allows you to play the role of a facilitator. I think
that's right.
are you referring to peer to peer? How about what's your view on peer to peer learning? Does foresight encourage that too? Is that the best way, or it should be the teacher is the source of knowledge and guidance, and she'll facilitate, but really, it's the source of knowledge is with your lecturer.
Oh, okay. Those days are gone. We always talk about Professor Google, right? People
Yes.
tend to say, I mean, if a lecturer tend to focus on her or his reference coming from Google, I mean, a student might as well learn from Google, right? I mean,
Yes.
seriously speaking. Now, the role of a professor has changed so much today, and what we know today is so outdated within seconds. And we know the younger generation, they learn very fast. They pick up things so fast. And when you talk about peer-to-peer learning, that's among one of the best way of learning. But I think we in the teaching profession is afraid to show our vulnerabilities, that we don't know enough. That actually our biggest expertise or biggest talent that we have is as a facilitator. What we may have is wisdom, because we went through certain experience in teaching and learning and knowledge acquisition, and with that knowledge we apply them. We have certain experience, and that is the wisdom, hopefully, that we gain out of that. And for some of it has spent for 50 years, 30 years, and that's a lot. And the younger generation do not have what we have. But we cannot be arrogant that we know everything, because we don't. And what we think are these principles of life to share with the younger generation. Suppose five. There are 5 principles that we want to share, has different contexts of application. Therefore, each one of the younger generation who applies it will see in a different, with different eyes, different experience, different context, different background they come from. And that is the role of us as a facilitator, to bring out to help them facilitate what they're learning, what they're processing in their mind, their hearts. And I think if you bring in foresight in there, and you talk about how at the end of the day, if you see what the future is about, you have to go back to the drawing board. I think if there's anything that futures as a whole has, well, like it or not, we are actually using foresight of futures in our day-to-day living, only that we don't formalize it as part of foresight of futures. But what I think, when you start using foresight as a scientific approach or step-by-step approach in learning about the future, you actually need to, one of the biggest gap in any foresight studies is that may not be value-based driven. It has to be value-based driven no matter what. And because you bring in certain values in it, and the values may be swayed to certain stakeholders' interests, or the values may be principles that are universal, that needs to be adhered to, that everybody should, if we have forgotten what it means. So, for example, IIUM talks about sejahtera quite a bit. And I think the word sejahtera has long been forgotten by many of us. We're having hectic lives. What is sejahtera in all angles of our life? Sejahtera in the communication, sejahtera in even in doing anything. Are we thinking 5 things when we sit down and on a task? And that is not sejahtera, actually, come to think of it. So the value-based driven approach has to come in any foresight exercise, and that value can come from our wisdom as a teacher, that we stand back and say, hey, what is it that we sincerely want to share with the students as a facilitator, and let them actually let them flower through that process. And yes, you're right. Peer-to-peer learning is one of the best way of learning anything, and it's a faster way of learning anything. Of course, within the right environment, of course. The only thing is if we want to use foresight as part of facilitating process, we need to actually develop certain interest in as a facilitator, because the role of facilitator is a totally different role. You don't assume knowledge is your absolute domain. You do not assume that you know everything, but you actually are going to learn from them. And it's a collective process of learning what is the outcome of that learning process. So that is if you really use foresight to it is as what is ideally should ultimately aim towards at the end of the day. The collective wisdom that comes from understanding what the future is all about.
Wonderful, Dr. Ellisha. Really, really wonderful. Listening to you is like it's just it's like listening to a book. Half of it's like listening to a book being read to me. It opens up my mind everywhere, left, right, center. I wanted to ask you a little bit more when you speak about your experience with the students in USM. How do you encourage them, and how do you know that they are applying it? I mean, not applying it correctly, but how do you bring them closer to the application part of it, of either projects or their personal decisions, more projects for the university, or their thoughts? How do you build thought leadership in areas for the students in terms of where the country is going, where the community is going, what do they think of it, and the framework that you teach them formally in classes, how do you then make it more real when they apply it, and how do you monitor that?
All right. What I do is I apply in, because I teach the specialization in sustainable development, so it kind of works very well. It jives very well with foresight studies, because in sustainable development studies, one of the things we look into is education for sustainable development. So that is a big core of sustainability development. It's not about knowing the textbook approach to sustainability. It's at the end of it, you got to apply it. Can you apply it? Can you see the change you are about as well? So the process that I go through with students is about my theory of change that I go through is the best change is not about not just realizing the issues out there, the knowledge you gain out of the issues what's happening out there, but it's about how you have changed in that process of learning. So if you embark on a course with me, you are actually embarking on a course of change for your own self. So my biggest hope is at the end of the course that they actually have a sense of who they are and what they want to do, aspire to do in the future. Whether you use the context of sustainability studies or not, whether they do use any of the theories or concepts I share, what's more important is what do they want to become when they leave the course? How do they want to champion any change as part of who they are when they leave the course, either as an employee, as an executive, either as a NGO, civil society member, as a family member, and so be it. So that is difficult because I make them go through the emotional realm of what the course may bring into them, and some students may not like it, because it touched the core of who they are. And some students may like only, give me the technical stuff and that's it. And I want to work with the exams and so forth. So how I do it is I expect each one of them to internalize it differently, a particular concept. I give a project, and the project normally is tied to the context of the current environment. So for example, one of the projects I recently did was on sustainable fisheries in Penang. So the expectation was students need to go and understand from, and look at the stakeholders, what the stakeholders are going through, look at different stakeholders' context of what's happening with sustainable fisheries, learn the theories related to sustainability, marine life, from environmental preservation point of view, everything that comes with under sustainable development. But when it comes to working on sustainable fisheries, they have to understand the issues. So this is where they work collectively, and they have to use their green hat, and they have to internalize their own perspective of what kind of change they are interested in. And that way, they are bringing themselves into the project. And when they finish the project, it's about who they are and what they feel is important for change, rather than just about the course itself, the technical subject of the course. So what I teach, at the end of the day, it's not that necessarily easy. We teach macroeconomics, it's probably not going to be that simple. If you teach financial strategy, that might not be as simple as that. But you teach a course such as social enterprise, such as green business, such as sustainable concepts, it allows you to do so. And so it brings back if there is anything related to competency building, it relates to leadership, relates to stewardship of change, it relates to how you want to play a role in making a difference out there in the world. So the course you're teaching makes a difference because you can bring it along. But like it or not, now more than ever, all courses have to bring that context, because every course out there that's under higher education have to show the element of SDG. Which SDG are you allocating your course under? So like it or not, they still have to think about that. So I think gone are the days where you just teach something for the sake of what the concepts are about, but you got to be able to make the students feel what they're learning about the course. And what I do is I go week by week when I teach. I base on the students' experience with the lessons. So if I steer it according to the student's progress. So it's very hard to come up with straightforward syllabus week by week and not change it. But it's more of being guided by the syllabus, but working and being guided by the students' progress. Because if the students need more effort and thinking along the lines of what leadership change is, and I have to go that way and probably spend 3 weeks on that, versus 1 week only on that. So it's about more of flexible in my teaching approach, so that students have a feel of what they're learning. And it's not easy because this is not something that is quite conventional in any courses that you teach. But what is going on in higher education, because now we are supposed to do blended learning approach, where you merge face-to-face with online learning, a lot of elements of independent learning, learning to think creatively, that comes in. And it's much easier to bring that in now, because we are expected to show that students are able to learn on a continuous mode according to the path that they want to take on. Some students are fast, some students take more time. So it's fine with blended learning. You allow them, as opposed to meeting face-to-face every week, and that's it. We move to the next syllabus, or next week lessons, and you forget the first 4 or 5 lessons. Those days are also gone. So I think more and more the higher education environment allows us to do that, what I'm doing right now. And if you bring a foresight in there, it even makes it even more beautiful, because you go through a facilitating process with the students. You may not use the futures episteme, like how those very what we call strict, those very serious futurists would, but the pedagogy of understanding the context of learning and how you may have foresight as part of your teaching and learning can still be included in there. So there are elements of the approach that can be included. In fact, I see more and more people are actually quite interested in using foresights without realizing it, the foresight element in part of their teaching and learning, or even their day-to-day work environment. If there's one word I want to use, is the idea is mainstreaming foresight. So if you don't do it in a structured way, there is a course called foresight and everybody has to take. No, but you mainstream it, so any course can use it, parts of the futures episteme if you want to. So in that way, it becomes a natural part of a learning process, natural part of teaching process, and it is not seen as you are being forced to work with it. So I like to use the word mainstreaming because at one point I learned this was a very important concept when it comes to women. In gender studies, one of the things they talk about is mainstreaming the mainstreaming the gender issues in all disciplines, for example. So in that way that you find that the gender issues are being brought in all disciplines. You don't have to have one study called gender studies and that's it. So I think that is something that people don't talk about mainstreaming foresight, but I think that's a beautiful concept to use when we think about how futures literacy can be part and parcel of curriculum, part and parcel of daily life, part and parcel of corporate environment. In fact, when I brought in foresight as part of one of the courses we teach, what does industry like? Industry likes tell me how to improve my product design. Tell me how, even if they love corporate strategy. Oh, tell me a lot about how do I go about with.
They just don't want to go out of business. How can I stay in business for a long time, or can I exit? What's my exit strategy if I need to go? If I need to exit, how can I make a lot? How can I be very profitable? Yes. And you're right. That's all they think about, and they use scenario planning and futures and corporate strategy for that. Exactly.
But when you bring in the context of creative thinking, green hat, working with it in ways that they have never seen before, they're actually very open to it, and they start putting on they start unboxing themselves, untrap themselves, and they start to, let their hair down. And then the emotions come out, and the whole idea of bringing the soul back into what you believe in, not just doing it for the sake of doing and making money, but doing it for the right reasons. And that comes out, and they actually love that because they don't get a chance to do that. They're always technical based. What am I going to do today? What's my goal? How am I achieving my KPI? Blah 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 blah. These are the tasks. Very task oriented, which is nothing wrong. Very important. And we have to if we want to get something out in our lives. But that is very extreme part of our lives these days, right? So the point here is the narratives. The foresight allows you to have different narratives. If every day is about what's your task today, what's your goal today, how you can achieve it, or ideas about being penalized for not doing this, or it's about KPIs, that narrative, right? That narrative, if it's still there 20 years down the road, then we have not. Narratives is about culture of change. Narratives cannot be forced. Narratives is something we say, it's a story we share amongst ourselves, what we feel about anything, and you cannot force this. How people feel about anything cannot be forced. And it just come out naturally. So those narratives, if you just hear today, when people talk, you just hear how people say it, what words they use, the tone of their language, tells you the narratives, tells you how they feel. And if you use foresight as part of the studies, what you want to do is you want to help and culture a different narrative. So student will say, is this going to come out in an exam? That's not going to be with their narratives. This will be a different type of narrative because it's still part of their narrative today in higher education. What's coming out in the exam? If it's not coming out, we're not going to figure it out. So what's beautiful about foresight is, if it's in future higher education, in higher education, is we, at least within the realm of the ivory tower, what are the narratives we talk about? If the narrative is the same as what the environment outside is talking about, the industry environment, the corporate environment, or the work environment, then it is really sad that higher education is not helping to nurture the narratives that should be discovered, so that you nurture the minds and with the soul and the minds together as a whole. And foresight should allow you to do that. But it's difficult because we're very technical based, we're time oriented, we need to work with time like you have to right now.
Exactly. Chop. We've got our targets for the day. I need to get on with it. I've been attached, I've worked, and it's such a privilege that I've been given the opportunity to work in different sectors over 25 years, and I spent several years in a think tank environment where I look at policy, and then I also worked in the typical consulting corporate environment where I looked at policy with in a completely different environment with different types of liabilities, profitability, the shareholders breathing down my necks, and it was every experience, Dr. Ellisha, for me, and humbly, was so rewarding because from every experience, you learn so much. You learn much. You learn what not to be. You learn what to be. You learn to unlearn. And as I sit and listen to you, I wanted to read to you actually an abstract which I had co-write with someone, but I just wanted to, and these are the things that you've said, that which just sticks to my mind. And when you talk about foresight, it needs to be mainstreamed, and I think there was another expert who mentioned that foresight could be put, we could study foresight embedded in an economics module or a program, or political science, or of strategy and foresight. It need not be. I don't think is there a need to set up a whole department called Department of Foresight Studies, but it's to be. It's because it's a framework. It's a framework. It's a way of looking at things, right? So that and foresight allowing you to have different narratives so that you can dream, you can have a vision. And it's not just about getting from one point to the other. But the whole journey, right? Where are all these little points going to lead me? Do I like where it's leading me? Do I like where I think I'm creating a lot of solid dots, but when the dots get joined, what picture do they draw for me? Can I draw that picture first, perhaps, and then work backwards and decide what sort of dots? But I'm just going to read you this abstract. In Malaysia, institutional transformation plans for universities can be hindered by the notion of key performance indicators, KPIs, and you mentioned this, imposed by various authorities and agencies. And in the case of your university, and even in our university, perhaps University of Science Malaysia, in this case, the emphasis on intangibles and immeasurable key intangible performance has been weakened. KIP, as opposed to KPI. KIP is something that some members who had the foresight wanted to introduce in the name of humanizing education, right? But KIP, which is key intangible performance indicators, were weakened by the initial KPIs and other measurable indicators in an oversimplified and naive manner. This includes, as you said, citation count, number of publications, and in particular types of journals commonly used to tabulate university rankings. On the contrary, the KIP is made possible by using a specially designed competency framework. There is no ticked box exercise of which the institution does not conform to neatly. Rather, it is based on a 360-degree approach together with the project partners based on a range of stated domains. So there are no academic grades formally assigned as such, but instead there is this a system to gauge behavioral change of students after having learned to apply. That's why I ask you about application, to apply knowledge acquired collectively to achieve the desired impact, and not so much what they can do as an individual. So ideally, you want students to have attributes such as teamwork, commitment, and empathy, among others. Again, I'm just playing devil's advocate. There will always be, people can always say, yes, this sounds very good. And I understanding about value-based education, humanizing it, but how do you measure it? How do you measure empathy? How do you know whether the students are embracing these values and they are applying it? It's just hard to measure. It's just hard to measure. So at the end of the day, wouldn't you agree that in a way it cannot be KPI, overwhelming KIP. It should be a balance of two.
Yes, it is actually one complements the other. I mean, you cannot have a tangible measurement for empathy. How can you measure empathy? Because empathy is within, and if you bring it out, there are many ways to show your empathy. Of course, you can see and observe someone showing empathy, and there are research on empathy. What is evidence of empathy? So yes, definitely. But it is also empathy also resides within an environment that is so fluid. People interact with each other, and your definition of empathy and how somebody shows empathy may be different from how anyone assess what empathy is shown by another person. And then you start having your own critical arguments about how this person shows better empathy than another person. So there's in a continuum. And because you want to give grades, okay, that student has shown empathy, so she gets 80%. That one is slightly there, so she gets 75. So there is a difference between 75 and 80% empathy, because you have to show grades that someone is better than somebody else, right? So, seriously, it is all about complementing one another. Now, if you ask me about tangible measurement or tangible outcomes, it is important. You need to know whether you have mastered a subject matter. And if the subject matter includes certain knowledge about something, yes, without that knowledge, you can't. But that should not be it all in any assessment, or even the same with academics. And we talk about KPI achievement. Yes, to have those journal publication shows you are sharing something within academic circles. That is the case, but I think what we are normally behind. We're thinking about academic journals or those KPIs. We're so behind with that because we've got to catch up with that. Mm-hmm. But more and more in even in the academic realm, they're not talking about that. They're talking beyond that. To them, publishing is important, but not necessarily in those Q1, Q2 journals, those high impact journals. But it's all about that you write well, but it doesn't have to be in those journal publications. So it's not about publishing in those. If you want to count, it's not publishing in those journals. It's about what you are publishing. What is the substantive that you're sharing? Substantiveness of what you're sharing, and that is what you should be. Even if you want to quantify what is worth sharing, and then you can quantify that. Quantifying is good, but as you said, it shouldn't be within that framework. I can only say it should be complementing one another, actually, more than anything else. But we're so skewed towards the other end. As long as you publish in those, it doesn't matter what you publish. You assume that if it's a peer-reviewed journal, you would have something good in there. Well, normally it might say that, but most of the time we tend to be very technical in what we publish anyhow. So the words are lost in it. The main substantiveness is lost because we tend to work within the structure that's being more appreciated as in number of words, this and that. So you can only put so much in your publication. So, this is the hardest thing that university is going through. We are going through our own evolution, and we are supposed to teach students to do against what we do. We're showing that we're doing something very technical oriented, which doesn't have soul in it. Yet we expect students to bring soul within themselves. So we're in conflict. We have this internal civil war. And then we expect to unleash the giant within the students. We can't even unleash the giants within us. I'm not saying you're right or not.
No, I think walk the talk and show by example and walk the talk. Yeah. So yeah, the students learn from us, I suppose. I think it's quite natural. Okay, my last question, and I'm not sure whether. Somehow, I'm sure you've touched on this question already. I've kept this conversation very free flowing, Dr. Ellisha, and so we've crossed several borders here and there. But what is your personal, or even for if you speak for you speak for USM all as well, and you can you can differentiate the two. What is your aspirations with futures literacy initiatives in Malaysia's higher education? Earlier you mentioned, you said that you don't need to register for a course called future for foresight studies or future studies. You could embed it, you could mainstream it, and therefore you would probably think that that we don't need to do we need to have a discipline called future studies in the universities for it to be successfully taught? You do. You do agree there should be discipline. Okay, but okay, putting that's one point. But beyond that, what is your aspirations with Futures Literacy initiatives
Right.
in Malaysia's universities?
All right. See, again, when we talk about the future studies initiatives or futures literacy initiatives in Malaysia, especially in higher education, I note that in the corporate environment, they are really good at it. They're really good in scenario planning. They're really good in coming up with scenarios. They're fantastic. In fact, I would applaud them for that. Now, in higher education, but they will see it from industry different perspective. They will see it from what they want to focus on, right? So in future, in order for futures literacy to take on the next path forward in higher education, if we want to use it, more importantly is we need to have stakeholder engagement. Futures literacy is a collective wisdom, right? But it has to start with a collective wisdom of a group of people who is interested to work with foresight. But after that, it needs to be owned by everybody else. When you look at scenario building or looking at future scenarios, it needs to have somehow the scalability of it moving forward has to be reaching a bigger audience at some point. If not, it will be owned by only a group of people who are being supposedly are representing a larger audience. It will not. So what would be good is if we have futures exercise, pockets of it in community of higher education within different stakeholder groups. It could be university students as a whole, peer among peer, working on the futures exercise, and then we have the administrative people working among themselves. It could be the academics within certain schools working among themselves. It could be as a whole, the university come together also to revisit the futures as it is. But because we need to have an approach that is has a systematic approach towards it. It has to have. It would be good to have an office that champions it, because you need to look at trends analysis. Foresight refers to trend analysis. You need to see what's going on. Someone is always mapping the trends forward. What's going on? Where are we now? What are the world talking about? What are different statistics being shared here and there? So data analytics is important. Actually, the organization out there, they talk about data analytics. So if we have data and we can see what the data is telling us, all that, it's easier to use it and share it so that people can use it. Because when you talk about the future alternatives or future scenarios or scenarios that we want to develop, it has to be driven by understanding the facts, what's going on in the ground. What are the statistics about crime? So suppose you're looking at future crime, future of the cyber crime, for example. You need to know what are the current statistics about how it has been developing. Without that knowledge, it's difficult to have a grip. You kind of have a general understanding, and then the scenarios that you develop might just be general because you cannot pinpoint to certain facts. So that is very important. In fact, if you ask me, the role of the university is actually to be able to philosophize on the futures, because we have the time as opposed to the corporate environment. And one of the things we could do is looking at wildcard scenarios. Like COVID-19 was not something that we thought would happen. It was
exactly.
It was probably something improbable that in the sense of what it has affected us. So we are working from home is now a new slogan, right? Work from home. So much so we have a lot of internal conflicts. Some people believe in working from home. Some people don't. Some people feel it's easier. Some people feel it's not easy. All right. So it was something that we don't think. It was supposed to be an option, work from home. Now it's not an option anymore. So a wildcard scenarios allow you to think the improbable is not, you don't expect it to happen, but if it were to happen, you know that it has negative impacts on us. While there are also positive impacts, there are a lot of negative impacts. It's not something we were ready for or are ready for. So
exactly.
this is something good that at the university level, if we nurture the minds even of students to be part of it, they not only do it for the sake of understanding a particular subject area, but they also can use it for themselves. When they leave when they join the society in different realms, because each one of us, when we join society, we are being trusted straight away to be part of a civil society, part of a community member, part of a family member, part of another institution, not just the organization you're working with. And we should realize that when you step out from the university, you are actually entering not just a corporate 9 to 5 environment or where you work, but you're actually entering society from different realm. And in fact, if you move forward, we're talking about sustainable cities now. And sustainable city is a different context. It's about sharing economy, shared prosperity. Everything is, the word shared is there. The word sejahtera needs to be applied 10 years down the road. But if you're not learning anything at the university, you try to figure it out in your work life, in your future ahead from the moment you graduate. I find that is so sad, because then they're not learning to grow where they ought to, the 4 years of the growth in the university, and that is so sad. This is really sad, and that is, if you think about that, if I were to my retrospection about what USM has gone through, our preferred future was flowering of the garden. That is the name of that preferred future, flowering of the
garden. That's beautiful. Right.
Flowering of the minds. And the vision of flowering in the minds is about how students are able to coincide together with the digital environment we're in a setup where you can have an Aristotelian approach in teaching and learning, where someone sits underneath a tree and you have what we call students who are learning from them as well. And that is the context of learning is different, where you are actually participating in learning environment in the rich context. So this is my aspiration, actually. If we want to work with foresight, we want to be able to understand what happens next. If you do the foresight exercise, you got to follow through what happens next, because it's about creating the new narratives, helping to build the new narratives. It's about a safe haven where you can discover new narratives, and then you can see and experiment with it. And then when you move out in an uncertain environment where people are not willing to be cooperative, people who have attitudinal issues, then how do you relate to that? But at least you have an understanding within this collective minds that there is something that we believe in that's good, that we want to move forward. That is that kind of positive environment that you want to be around you, and that can be done in a university environment. And it should not be the narratives of students when they leave the university. It's like, well, I didn't learn much from there. We don't want that narratives,
Exactly.
Beautifully
put, because you're trying to say that in a way it's sad. It's sad. Well, in a way it's good, but it's also sad because it's you're in the university, you can't change the rest of the world, it's beyond your control, but you have this opportunity to provide the safe haven for students to have that experience, to dream, to have a vision, to have different types of narratives, knowing that when they leave you, they may face a different type of world, but they will be equipped to hopefully inspire others, infuse their beautiful narratives into the world out there. Because the world out there it's a tough, it's a jungle, it's if I could say, it's a dog eat dog world, depending on which sector you enter, especially the corporate sector, where it's all about profitability. It's ruthless. It's ruthless. And you said it beautifully when you said that, because I studied business for some years and I was in the corporate sector. They do fantastic scenario plannings because they have fantastic data. And you mentioned about the importance of mapping. Consultants always map. We always start off a project looking at the landscape, identifying nuances, and we do mapping. That's the most important thing. After we map, that's when we start diving deep. right? But you can't do it without identifying your trends, your mega trends, and the emerging issues. Some of it you could say could be the future, right? Where do you expect disruptions to occur? There are some data. It could be debatable, and then you've got the facts and figures coming out of the Department of Statistics, DOS, for instance, or Bank Negara, where you cannot dispute, right? But then you also have the trends, the emerging issues, or where the interruptions coming from, at the which part of the if you're studying, if you're Honda and you're looking at at producing cars, what's going to happen now with COVID, and I don't know, maybe with COVID, the trees look brighter and greener, it's less pollution, things are good, and perhaps later the government may change the policy. It could provoke a policy change because they think, you know what? Hang on, Mr. Corona is about to leave. We found the vaccine, but we don't want to have so many cars on the street. We're going to make it very expensive to buy cars. Singapore did that. They made a decision to make cars very, very expensive for many reasons. Okay, we've spent millions on our mass rapid transits and our train stations. We want people to take public transport more and not cars. We're going to make it expensive. We don't want the pollution. So I think you're so right. I'm really excited to see what type of policy changes COVID's going to provoke. This pandemic, the aftermath of the pandemic, could provoke changes at different multiple levels. And it's interesting that you lined out, like in front of us. Wow, Dr. Ellisha, like a plethora of work which needs to be done. There's so many projects coming up in my mind as you're speaking. You were saying, we need an office that actually look at trends always and focus on data analytics. And you spoke about perhaps, like, for example, cybercrime, which is cybersecurity, cybercrime is a very hot topic now. And who has the statistics on it? Who's tracking? Who's checking? Who knows that we are always ahead of the curve, and there's no way we can do it without data. We need people who are watching, constant people who are always watching. So you mentioned that. You mentioned about the university environment having to be a safe environment, a safe haven for students to have new narratives. And then you also said that, yes, future studies should be a discipline in all universities. Am I right? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. You need a futures office to help steer to champion the whole thing. But whether it's a proper course or not, it depends on how it transpires among the stakeholders. Because some foresight can be mainstreamed through different through modules in all courses, or it can be a discipline by a course by itself. It depends on the context, because it has to have a stakeholder engagement.
Yes, so you find
and
out
it has to be acceptable.
What the needs are. Yeah.
This is not acceptable, then you are not meeting your needs. You're not making it something that is appreciated and accepted. It has to be voluntary.
The starting point will be to engage stakeholders, identifying who they are and engaging them. That will be the starting point before we decide how to fit future studies in that environment.
Or you can already use it. You, as a lecturer, you can already use it. Anyone who wants to champion it can use it without waiting for any structural changes within the university. But if the leadership within the university can play a leading role in, so we have the bottom-up and top-down approach towards it, where you see how things develop from there, and that will be a good effort. What's more important is to build new statistics. So one of the things in foresight is, if you move forward, if you do it within higher education, you realize there's certain preferred angle of the future that university wants to move forward in towards. Then you got to follow through with new initiatives, bit by bit, track it and see where we're progressing, and then start revisit the scenarios or the future that you are working with new statistics. So when I say statistics, they're referring to new, if the idea here is to say, like you say, one of the policy change should be making cars expensive, or So that is a new statistic. So when you say cars becoming more expensive, then less people buy cars. That's a new statistics we have, right?
Yeah.
So even within environment, within within higher education, you can do that. So then that leads towards new KPIs actually. You're creating new KPI, new statistics. So people will perform based on the new statistics. Then you create new structures, and lo and behold, there will be people contesting. Right? They will say, "I like this. I don't like this. I don't like what you're imposing on me," and that's normal. And
The
you got to
ripple
continue
effects.
with
There
the
will always
stakeholders.
be ripple effects. Yeah.
There will be a lot of contestations, but at some point it will reach an equilibrium stage where a new normal will happen. So basically, we're talking about new normals here. I know if COVID talks about the new normals, we are developing new normals, not business as usual anymore. When you enter the foresight, quote unquote game, if you want to seriously venture into it, you want to create new normals, where that new normals will have tipping points in the lives of each individual when they leave, when they get out of the university environment. Even when they're part of the university environment, you're still going out, visit friends, visit family, you're still working, you're creating new tipping points there. And that will be the kind of change you can expect. And that can there be a policy influence on the Ministry of Education and or other higher education, other institutions, and you don't know where it's going to lead you towards, but we want to also be open to receiving feedback, and there's a lot of learning that will be happening together as a whole. So I will end it with one main point here, that the whole idea of foresight is to allow, if you were to exercise it, is about social innovation for change, social capacity for change, and social innovation or social capacity for change is not something that's individual. It has to be done in partnership with others. It's a collaborative effort. It's not competing, it's collaborative. It's not what we're going through today. Each and every one of academics are competing for their own KPIs first, and then only they do it together on any other projects. If it's not one in it for me, then I will shudder away and do something else first, and meet my objective first, then only I come together. And the same thing with students. Right, I will make sure I score my marks, so I will compete. I might not share what I know, and this is I'm not number one, so you are number one, so I'm not going to work with you or whatever it is. I'm number one. I will only work with number one, and when I create a team, I work with those who are more productive than those who are not. Right, so this is the social innovation for change that we want, because when they go back into the world, it's about collaboration.
It's about teamwork.
You cannot live in a world that is, but of course, it's not going to be easy, because the survival of the fittest will always be amongst us when we talk about change. It's very difficult. So at the very least, it opens up the hearts and minds of each and different types of institution out there. Make it be it corporate, be it non-corporate environment, be it in a school environment, be it in any environment for that matter. And I wouldn't want to point finger to the corporate environment per se, although we always point the finger to the corporate. But the corporate is part of the society. And the society actually has an influence on the corporate, whether you like it or not. So we have an influence over the corporate environment. Each and one of these our individuals out there have a role there. It starts with if it's higher education having an influence over the graduates, who has an influence over where they work, what they do, and how they participate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellisha. I think we've reached the end of our interview right now, and a little bit extra, and you've just summarized everything beautifully. Would you like to just end with your last point, or how would you like to sum up your greatest your greatest sentiment that you want to end this interview with?
I said a lot. I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this, but if I were to end this with my conclusion statement here, I will say that my learning, my experience with foresight has always been full of new tipping points for me, because every time I work with foresight, it allows me to learn more about how teaching and learning needs to change more and more, because the role of higher education is to facilitate instead of to instruct. And while we tend to point finger on the school environment for bringing in students who are needing to be fed, we are actually encountering it more and more as we keep on going with our daily teaching and learning. So I believe as an educator here, there's a lot I'm learning when I use the futures method in approach in my teaching and learning, because there's a lot I do not know. Because we are entering the creative hats with the students when we move into the foresight experience with them. But I believe that at the end of the day, any teaching and learning is about engendering the social capacity for change. And it's not anymore about what you read in a book. It's not about the knowledge you gain, but it's about how you understand how the knowledge means for you in the world you live in.
Applying the knowledge.
Applying the knowledge, but when you start applying the knowledge, it has different facets of interpretation, different facets of application, and there's no one right way to apply any knowledge. And every experience adds on to another experience. It becomes the value from it is totally different. And I may be entering the abstract realm when I say this, but a person needs to be willing to allow their emotions to come up, to surface, to be part of learning, to be part of a learning environment. And foresight makes you do that. You have to be in touch with your inner world. You have to be in touch with your emotions. You got to be in touch with who you are, where you come from, where you want to go. You've got to be in touch with the kind of pathway of change you want to have in your life. And you got to be in touch with who you want to become, and allow that process of change to embrace that process of change, because you do not know where you're going to go, because as you said, nothing is cast in stone. I mean, what you see is possible scenario. You may not even pan out, but you have a role in creating new statistics, new events, new relationships, new pathways, new experiences that is different from what is being said to you. So you question all the assumptions. You see the world, you see it from different. Why are people doing this? Why are we not doing it differently? Why are we doing what people are doing? And you learn to appreciate those a different set of questions in your mind, rather than just keep on going like what others are doing. And that is the biggest, I think that's the biggest learning that you can impart on the younger generation, actually. Because if you meet them one day, 20 years down the road, it's who they become along the way that transpired in that 4 years with you that allows them to take certain pathway that you never know where they go. And you cannot even pinpoint it's because of you, actually, because everything is interconnected. It's their decisions, the influences they have in their lives. If there's anything, there's a value of foresight. It doesn't matter what discipline you're in. It can be economics, it can be political science, it can be business, it can be architecture, it can be any area whatsoever. But it plays a role in widening our horizon more than we could ever think of. It's questioning assumptions. Be it all, it's questioning assumptions, and that's what we really need today with what we're going through in our day to day. It's questioning assumptions.
It's beautiful, Dr. Ellisha. It's profound what you've said. It's I think if you've shared so much, and there's so much in this 1 hour of interview. I mean, honestly, someone could write a book on it. And I think you've highlighted the emotional value of the learning experience. And you're not, it's you need to be brave to be in touch with the emotions. And sometimes people are not comfortable, and you are 100% right. And you pointed that out. Sometimes they just want to be robotic about it and technical because it's
Which is what the
easier.
world is about now. Which is what the world is about. Efficiency,
Yeah.
productivity. There's a narrative. It will always be the narratives, right?
Exactly.
KPI.
So that's why there was a futurist, and IIUM just is in the middle of going through a future scenario building workshop with Professor Sohail and Ayatollah, and he did say that it's sometimes futures literacy. I mean, when you really understand it and what it makes you ask and prod and it pokes at you and it pokes at you and makes you go to parts of yourself that you are not comfortable to go to. It can be a scary process. It's because you don't want to think about it.
That's
You
right.
don't want to think about it. It's easier to say, I want to get to that point. I'm a diligent person. I can come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, how to do it. Just walk there. I'm there. And they don't want to question anything beyond that because it's scary. It makes you visualize things. It makes you have emotions that you'd rather not have or provoke within yourself. So, but I think everything you said has been so beneficial to me, and I'm sure to all listeners. And I thank you for joining IIUM in trying to create a platform to benefit others on the importance of futures literacy and how it has impacted Malaysian higher education. And it also helps us chart the way forward as IIUM is taking concrete steps in trying to humanize education and trying to infuse sejahtera in our academic framework and trying to use the foresight tools in aiding our lecturers and our students in this in this lifelong journey. And we're all learning, and I feel really privileged to be brought in to help with this project, to help Tan Sri Zulkifli, the current rector of IIUM, with this project. It's a huge opportunity, a privilege to serve the community, to serve the university, and it gives me so much fulfillment, really, as a person. Yeah, and I thank you once again, Dr. Ellisha. You've spent so much time. It's tiring. You've spoken so much, and we were even discussing through email and a phone call, and take care, and we'll see you soon, and hopefully you can join us again in the next
Thank you so
webinar.
much.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the time and for the opportunity. Right.
You're most
I wish you all the best. Wish you all
Thank
the
you.
best with this noble project.
Yes. See you soon. Assalamualaikum.
See you soon. Waalaikumsalam. Bye.
Bye-bye.